What happens when 36 nations decide to shut their airspace to a single country? A surprising twist unfurls in the world of aviation, as the consequences ripple back to the very nations that imposed the sanctions. 9 months into a tempestuous geopolitical conflict, voices from the West begin calling for the restoration of air travel with Russia, an unexpected turn led not by junior officials but by influential figures, including William Walsh, head of the International Air Transport Association. He urges, we need to consider opening Russian airspace. But hold on. Shouldn't it be up to Russia to decide who flies over its territory? After all, those same 36 nations are the ones that voluntarily opted for sanctions, turning their backs on what was once a bustling air route over Russian skies. Walsh's statement sounds more like a distress signal, an admission of a growing crisis in the Western aviation industry. The truth is, Western airlines are experiencing turbulence, and it's affecting not only carriers but also manufacturers. The aviation ecosystem is a tightly woven tapestry, where disruption in one area quickly ensnares all others. With Europe leading the sanctions charge, they aim to wound Russia's economy, but the unexpected fallout hit the European airlines instead. Flight routes to Asia have now stretched significantly. To illustrate, a journey from Paris to Tokyo that once took 9 hours now stretches to a grueling 14. Now, the Finnish airline Finnair, once a key player in connecting Europe with Asia, is struggling under the weight of these sanctions. The routes that used to give them a competitive advantage have vanished. Passengers are now faced with longer travel times. Who wants to spend 5 extra hours in the air when there are alternatives? Meanwhile, Middle Eastern carriers like Emirates and Qatar Airways, as well as Chinese and Indian airlines, capitalize on the situation, flying shorter routes and unaffected by restrictions. As routes lengthen, fuel costs soar, and flights become noticeably pricier, all while airlines keep this information tightly under wraps, citing trade secrets. However, the cancellation of multiple routes reveals a troubling truth: bypassing traditional pathways can often be financially unviable. Where European airlines retreat, new players from Asia and the Middle East emerge, steadily pushing out their European counterparts from lucrative transit markets. This shift impacts not only airlines but also giant manufacturers like Airbus and Boeing, as demand shrinks, and financial obligations for already leased aircraft pile up. If the closed airspace persists, the Western aviation industry could nosedive. Adding fuel to the fire, consider potential disruptions in the supply chains for critical materials like aluminum and titanium, where Russia stands as a major producer. The prices for aviation fuel are climbing as well, a catastrophic combination for Western airlines. Walsh's sudden calls to reopen Russian airspace are not acts of goodwill, they are desperate attempts at self-preservation. So, who is really to blame here? Russia? No, the decisions came from Europe. It's a familiar adage: the airspace is not merely air, it's a commodity, an invaluable resource. With the European Union barring Russian aircraft from its skies entirely, these bureaucrats seem to overlook geography's mighty hand. A mere glance at the world map could have provided foresight: Moscow's retaliatory measures would be significant and painful. In this unfolding scenario, as winter blankets Europe, airlines struggle under the weight of self-imposed restrictions while the competition from Asia gathers momentum. The spring of this year began with grand declarations, a historic agreement celebrated with much fanfare between the United States and Ukraine. Yet, the reality soon crashed down as Russian forces seized strategic resources. The questions linger like a cloud: what about the resources of Ukraine? The reality reveals a sobering truth. As Russia consolidates its control over Europe's largest lithium deposit, once bustling agreements suddenly lose value now that the rosy ambitions of Western powers are overshadowed by stark reality. It appears Russia is on track to dominate not only lithium but also essential minerals, holding substantial portions of crucial materials. By early 2025, independent forecasts suggest looming control over around 70% of Ukraine's resources, valued at staggering sums. The earlier optimism fades as reality bites, an alarming omen for Europe's lofty aspirations. While Western nations grapple with their self-imposed losses, the potential for a new wave of competition arises from the East. As Chinese carriers prepare to take flight without restrictions, the balance of power may shift perceptibly in the aviation sector, further eroding European competitiveness. The potential for further economic shakeups looms. As a forward-looking question hangs in the air, will Europe reclaim its lost airspace or spiral deeper into this self-created labyrinth? Only time will reveal the true ramifications of this aviation crisis. Amidst a dizzying landscape of international tensions, one question echoes with urgency: how did a series of sanctions meant to weaken Russia end up leaving European airlines in peril? The airspace blockade enforced by 36 nations transformed routes from Europe to Asia into much longer and more costly journeys. For instance, the flight from Paris to Tokyo, once a manageable 9 hours, has now ballooned to an exhausting 14 hours. This shift has hit certain airlines, notably the Finnish company Finnair, which was a vital connector between East Asia, Europe, and the United States. The introduction of sanctions obliterated Finnair's business model, sending passenger numbers plummeting through Helsinki. Travelers now faced extended time in the skies, a luxury few could afford, especially when alternatives beckoned. Middle Eastern carriers like Emirates and Qatar Airways, alongside Chinese and Indian airlines, continued their efficient operations without hindrance, sustaining their short-distance routes. As Europe clung stubbornly to its sanctions, economic realities began to set in. Extended routes meant skyrocketing fuel costs and inflated ticket prices, a bitter pill that airlines discreetly swallowed, cloaking the information as a trade secret. The cancellation of numerous flights hinted at the undeniable truth: these detours were no longer viable. And as European airlines faltered, their void was swiftly filled by carriers from China, India, and the Persian Gulf. This steady encroachment not only reshaped the market landscape but also threatened the giants of aeronautics, including Airbus and Boeing. The predicament extended beyond just flight routes. Airline companies faced mounting financial pressures as they struggled to pay for leased jets, and demand for new aircraft dwindled dramatically. If the closure of airspace persisted for another year, the future of the Western aviation industry hung by a thread, teetering on the brink of collapse. To complicate matters, potential supply disruptions for aluminum and titanium, crucial materials in aircraft manufacturing where Russia plays a significant role, loomed ominously. Then, suddenly, IATA Director William Walsh raised the red flag, calling for the reopening of Russian airspace. This wasn't a gesture of goodwill or concern for passengers but rather a desperate move to salvage the collapsing industry. Without access to Russian airspace, Europe faced not just losses but dire unemployment rates. One is left pondering, who holds the blame for this self-induced crisis? Surely not Russia. Europe alone chose this course. As geopolitical dynamics shift, it becomes clear that trading in airspace is no longer just an intangible concept. The rights to fly over such influential regions as Russia have evolved into both a lucrative and strategically vital commodity. As the end of February approached, the European Union completely shuttered its airspace to any Russian aviation. The bureaucrats in Brussels anticipated this would punish the Russian populace by severing their connections to a vibrant European marketplace. Yet, a casual glance at the map reveals the fragility of such decisions. Pushback came swiftly from the unyielding airline sector. Finnish companies were the first to voice their discontent. Finnair, once a favored choice for both Europeans and Russians, thrived on its short routes through Russian skies, setting it apart from its competition. The repercussions of sanctions swiftly unraveled decades of economic ties. The situation reflected a broader pattern in the energy sector: cheap Russian gas evaporated, replaced by costly alternatives. The same narrative unfolded in air travel. Affordable flight corridors vanished, leaving only expensive and lengthy alternatives that Asian carriers eagerly embraced. The giants of the Middle East soared, leveraging Russian airspace while European competitors dwindled. Walsh, now expressing regret, had once supported the European air embargo. His newfound pleas for reconsideration raise eyebrows. Yet, if European airlines had previously enjoyed annual bonuses nearing $2 billion from transit fees, their current predicament weighs heavily, negating any haste on Russia's part to make concessions. Could new Asian carriers soon emerge, backed by major European firms looking to circumvent restrictions? The irony lies in how British officials once speculated about taxing the air itself. Now, Europe faces decline, while Russia capitalizes on its resource control. Attempts from the UK to propose taxation on flights traversing Russian territory hint at desperation. This absurdity reveals unsustainable practices, yet innovative sanctions continue to emerge from London. All while Finnair teeters on the brink of insolvency, potentially the first victim in a looming wave of bankruptcies that could engulf other once thriving Western airlines. But the news is not all dire. Upcoming complete removals of flying restrictions for Chinese airlines threaten to solidify the dominance of Asian competition. Against this backdrop, The spring began with grandiosity as U.S. financial authorities and Ukraine's vice premier celebrated what was deemed a monumental agreement over rare earth elements. Yet, mere weeks later, shifting realities took the stage. Russia has secured control over critical lithium deposits, shifting the balance once again. With the situation in Ukraine precarious, one wonders, how do these geopolitical games truly resonate for strategic resources? Russia has not merely claimed land, but rather access to a rich vein of minerals. Out of 4 primary lithium deposits in Ukraine, only 2 remain under Kyiv's control. In light of the critical nature of lithium for both U.S. economy and defense, the value of its Ukrainian agreement is rapidly diminishing. This once celebrated pact now hangs like a shadow on the walls, overshadowed by newer realities. As analyses paint an increasingly clearer picture, Russian control looms over a staggering 70% of Ukrainian mineral resources, collectively valued at an estimated $26 trillion. These resources include 40% of all metal ores and significant amounts of coal reserves that once bolstered a thriving steel industry in Ukraine. Now, those resources contribute to Russia's economic engine, marking a profound shift in the balance of power in global economics. And so, the discourse swirls, leaving us pondering the eternal question, what price does the air carry, and who ultimately controls the skies? In an unexpected twist, William Walsh, once a supporter of the European decision to close its skies to Russian flights, has now signaled a desperate need to reopen them. This change of heart is not an act of goodwill, it's a plea to salvage Western fortunes. Without access to Russian airspace, companies may face dire financial losses and job cuts. Who truly bears the blame for this predicament? Western nations need to reflect on their choices. Since the European Union imposed a complete ban on Russian aviation at the end of February, officials claimed it would severely punish Russia. However, this sentiment reveals a glaring misunderstanding of geography and international economic ties. A mere glance at a world map could have indicated that Moscow's retaliatory measures would trigger significant repercussions. And those consequences manifested quickly. While Brussels may have postured with unwavering determination, discontent is bubbling up from the airlines themselves. The first to voice their grievances were the Finns. Finnair, once flourishing due to quick routes over Russian territory, had provided a competitive edge. Weekend trips from St. Petersburg to Finland were a popular escape, now shattered by bureaucratic decisions. Finland hastily dismantled decades of economic relationships without a second thought. The turmoil experienced by Finnair mirrors broader industry woes. The sanctions that drove away cheap Russian gas have also led to the disappearance of affordable flight paths, replaced by long, expensive routes now utilized by Asian airlines. Middle Eastern carriers particularly benefit from the situation, continuing to access Russian airspace and solidifying their dominance in the global market. Yet, there's a limit to this resilience. Even stalwart figures like Walsh are beginning to crack under pressure. They once supported the European Union's ban, but now face the reality of diminishing profits and market share. The looming question remains, how long can they endure this self-inflicted isolation before it spirals into a full-blown crisis? With the potential for a complete lift of restrictions on international flights for Chinese airlines on the horizon, European carriers could soon find themselves outmatched as their Asian competitors rise sharply in the ranks. What will be their next move? Will they continue to grasp at straws, or will they finally recognize that the airspace they took for granted is now a matter of survival? As the dust settles on the aviation world's heated skirmishes, a pivotal figure emerges. William Walsh, a once ardent supporter of the ban on Russian airspace, now finds himself scrambling for a lifeline. He declares a need to reconsider the closed sky over Russia, hinting at the desperation lurking beneath the surface. How did we arrive at this juncture? Before the upheavals began, Russia raked in around $2 billion annually from transit routes passing through its skies. But now, the chessboard has shifted. Walsh's pleas come amid a storm of looming bankruptcy threats hanging over Western carriers. European air traffic has become a labyrinth of increased costs and extended flight times. Airlines like Finnair are already feeling the unraveling threads of their once thriving business models. But why should Russia rush to ease sanctions when there are players in Asia ready to fill the void? They are primed to swoop in, piloted by giants of aviation eager to claim routes abandoned by their struggling European counterparts. The absurdity does not stop there. The British government has even proposed a bizarre air tax, a symbolic slap on the wrist for those flying over Russian territory. Can you imagine taxing air itself? That's the state of Europe's tactics. While Western leaders concoct elaborate sanctions strategy in boardrooms, Finnair teeters on the edge of collapse, a potential harbinger of a wider industry shakeup. Yet there's more. Plans to lift restrictions on Chinese airlines could seal the fate of European ones. As this relentless tide rises, the Asian and Middle Eastern carriers are positioned to eclipse their competitors, ushering in a new era where they are the unstoppable forces. What lay ahead this spring was initially wrapped in optimism, with grand ceremonies celebrating an agreement between the US and Ukraine over rare earth minerals. But as reality sets in, whispers of Russian control over critical resources grow louder. Do we really understand what has been sacrificed for these so-called historic agreements? Stay tuned as the game of global aviation shifts dramatically, revealing unexpected allies and fierce foes. The question stands, can the West recover its foothold in an unpredictable sky? The countdown to the next shocking reveal has begun. In the previous segment, we explored the ongoing international pressure on European airlines and how emerging competitors from China and the Middle East are gaining ground. This shift could spell disaster for European carriers, highlighting the vulnerability of their market positions as global dynamics continue to change rapidly. As spring arrived, amidst lofty fanfare, the United States Secretary of the Treasury and Ukraine's first deputy prime minister struck what was hailed as a monumental deal for rare earth minerals. The Western media quickly lauded this as a historic turning point, indicating that U.S. support for Ukraine had pivoted dramatically. Empowered by this newfound support, Zelensky audaciously signaled his defiance to the Kremlin. But illusions of triumph faded swiftly, giving way to stark realities. Numerous foreign trips, speeches at summits, and clandestine consultations in the heart of Kiev had vanished in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, a significant twist emerged: Russian forces secured control over a strategically crucial lithium deposit near the village of Shevchenko. This revelation stirred a state of urgency in the West, drawing attention back to the state of Ukrainian resources and their hard-won agreements. It appeared that the situation was quite telling. Russia didn't just gain a minor foothold, it seized the largest lithium deposit in Europe, containing a staggering 13.8 million tons of lithium ore. Of the 4 main lithium sites in Ukraine, only 2 remained under Kiev's control. Given lithium's critical importance to the U.S. economy and defense, the value of their agreement with Ukraine plummeted, effectively halving. Moreover, the Shevchenko site boasted other valuable minerals including tantalum, niobium, beryllium, and quartz. Thus, the documents celebrated in spring like a trophy now seemed destined only for household use. According to independent assessments, by February 2025, Russia could control about 70% of Ukraine's mineral resources, with a staggering estimated worth of up to $26 trillion. Among these were 40% of all metallic ores, 1/3 of the iron ore reserves, and nearly 2/3 of the nation's coal deposits. Previously, liberated coking coal mines fueled up to 65% of Ukraine's steel industry. Now, they would power the Russian economy. What consequences lie ahead for Europe as their foothold crumbles in the face of relentless geopolitical shifts? Can they adapt fast enough to salvage their position before it's gone for good? In a seismic shift of power and resources, by February 2025, Russia had seized control of approximately 70% of Ukraine's mineral wealth, valued at a staggering $26 trillion. This includes 40% of total metal ores, 1/3 of iron ore reserves, and nearly 2/3 of the country's coal deposits. These mines once fueled Ukraine's steel industry, providing up to 65% of its output. But now, they churn under a new flag, bolstering the Russian economy. What has led to this significant turning point? Recent analyses indicate that Russia is on the verge of monopolizing critical strategic elements like tantalum, cesium, and strontium. Among the treasures are the Dnipro mining facilities, famed for the superior quality of iron ore compared to Kryvyi Rih reserves. The Azov deposit remains Ukraine's only complex source of zirconium and rare earth elements, one of the largest in Europe. Also notable is the Petrovaginer mine, rich in cerium, alongside the Mazarovo find, abundant in tantalum, niobium, zirconium, and other rare minerals. Adding to this colossal cache are 27 gas fields, 9 oil deposits, and 2 significant titanium-containing sites. Conservative estimates suggest Russia now holds at least 33% of Ukraine's rare earth resource base. Prior to a significant agreement, Ms. Remazova, head of the relevant department at Ukraine's Institute of Geological Sciences, confidently proclaimed that if the U.S. showed interest here, the occupation would swiftly end. In retrospect, such a statement seems naively optimistic. Just last week, the New York Times lamented the loss of the Shevchenkovsky deposit. Tragically wrapped in plastic tears. It reported, the more territory Russia occupies, the fewer resources Ukraine has as leverage in discussions with the West. A growing sense of urgency and concealed disappointment blankets the Ukrainian leadership as U.S. military aid fails to escalate, despite the rapid loss of invaluable assets. In this theater of resource drama, analysts in the West are left bewildered. Why is there no immediate military response, no tomahawks raining down on Russian forces that audaciously seize critical resources? As tensions rise and crucial assets slip away, the depths of this conflict echo far beyond the battlefield, shaking the very foundations of alliances and strategies. Will the West awaken before it's too late, or will the echoes of Ukrainian despair turn into a silent resignation? In the unfolding geopolitical drama, the world watches as Western aviation faces an unprecedented crisis. A reality check reveals that the strategies once believed to cripple Russia are now backfiring spectacularly. How could a couple of aircraft sanctions turn the tide in favor of Moscow? The answer lies deep in the intricacies of global economics and political maneuvering. Since the onset of military operations, 36 nations shuttered their skies to Russian aircraft, believing they could cripple the aviation giant. In retaliation, Moscow responded with mirrored bans over its airspace. Fast forward 9 months, and influential Western figures, including William Walsh, the Director General of the International Air Transport Association, are advocating for the revival of air travel links to Russia. Why this sudden change? Isn't the airspace owned by Russia, or has the West realized they've overplayed their hand? The very nations that imposed sanctions now find themselves in distress. The closure of air routes has drastically lengthened flights from Europe to Asia, with some journeys increasing by nearly 30%. A flight from Paris to Tokyo now demands 14 hours instead of the former 9. The Finnish airline Finnair, once a dominant player, is teetering on the brink of collapse, unable to compete with Middle Eastern carriers that continue to utilize shorter, more profitable routes. As whispers escalate, the realities become undeniable. Flights becoming economically unviable spells disaster for the European aviation sector. Who could have predicted that a simple political maneuver would unravel established trade routes, displacing carriers not only in passenger travel but also in supply lines, stretching from manufacturers to major industry players like Airbus and Boeing? The pressure is building, and Walsh's remarks seem more like a cry for survival than a mere suggestion. Is Europe prepared to pivot and acknowledge the mistakes made? Europe once controlled vital transit routes to Asia, generating significant revenue. But as countries that once benefited from these routes flounder, the air travel landscape is transforming with new players like Emirates and Qatar taking center stage. Could this be the harbinger of European airlines entering a prolonged decline? Even as Walsh suggests reconsidering airspace access, the question looms, what would such a decision mean for Europe? Historically, transactions over airspace have been lucrative, but now they could become a vital strategic resource. It's a harsh reality check for a continent caught in its political web. As these complex dynamics unfold, the surprising undercurrents reveal much about the strategies of nations. Can the West navigate this labyrinth without acknowledging the hard truths that have emerged? Will they remain blind to the shifting sands beneath their feet? Amid rising tensions and an unpredictable future, the call to redefine strategies grows louder. With each passing day, the stakes escalate as new realities reshape the geopolitical landscape. In this intricate tale of power and resources, the air above Russia is more than just a passage, it is a battleground for control that may redefine the global balance of power. Can Europe adapt before it's too late, or will this miscalculation lead to their ultimate downfall? As discussions around air travel options linger in conference rooms, the larger question surfaces: when will the West take decisive action to reclaim its position in the skies? Time is ticking, and the implications are vast. How Europe addresses the fallout from these ambitious sanctions may either secure its future or lay the groundwork for its decline. The clock is ticking, and the outcome remains uncertain. Furthermore, while Europe grapples with losing ground in air travel, they must also contend with resource management. With Russia gaining control over critical lithium deposits in Ukraine, will we witness a reordering of economic priorities? The intricacies of this global chess game unfold, revealing that every action has repercussions that extend into the heart of nations. In conclusion, the lens of aviation tells only part of the story. The larger narrative reflects a key turning point in global economics, the realignment of power and resources in a world where traditional dynamics falter. The interconnectedness of these issues dismantles preconceived notions of control, demanding a re-evaluation of latent strategies. Will Europe recognize the threats before it's too late, or are they destined to repeat the mistakes of the past? Only time will tell as the winds of change sweep across the continents. In the wake of sanctions and a shifting geopolitical landscape, the reliance on shorter air routes between the West and Asia has crumbled. Recent developments reveal a sobering truth: without Russia, the West's traditional pathways flounder, revealing a fragile European model of globalization. The energy and mineral resource dilemma surrounding Ukraine underscores a strategic pivot for the United States and the European Union. Economic dependencies on critical elements like lithium and tantalum, essential for electronics and defense, intensify, leading to a perilous double bind. As access to Ukraine's valuable mineral resources dwindles, the repercussions echo beyond the nation's borders. This significant loss isn't just a local setback, it disrupts the entire energy and industrial balance in the region. Ironically, plans for collaborative lithium processing plants in Ukraine now seem futile. Meanwhile, Russia's control over these invaluable resources fortifies its position in both domestic and international markets. New supply chains are emerging, with partners in China, India, Turkey, and Southeast Asia forming a resource alliance that challenges Western corporations. For Europe, this means a slow erosion of its role as an independent player in the global economy. Experts in Brussels are beginning to voice their concerns. Without inexpensive energy resources and transit routes, Europe risks becoming a peripheral economy. Over the next 5 to 7 years, European airlines and industrial giants may be forced to scale back or relocate operations to regions that offer reliable access to resources and efficient logistics. Can Europe adapt to this new reality, or is it already too late? As the stakes rise, the fallout of these decisions could reshape the global landscape, pitting East against West in a struggle for survival. As tensions mount, will Europe concede its influence, or will bold new strategies emerge from the ashes of complacency? Only time will tell how deep the implications of this crisis will run. In a world where the airlines soar above and economies intertwine, a shocking reality surfaces. What if the very sanctions imposed to cripple a nation turned into a boomerang, wreaking havoc on the countries that initiated them? As months pass since the onset of a military operation against Russia, nations face the chaotic aftermath of their decisions. The airspace was closed, and with it, opportunities began to vanish. Amid the economic storm, stirrings of discontent rise among businesses once silent. Airlines that once adhered to a diplomatic neutrality now voice their grievances, realizing their interests clash with political ideologies, creating a tension so palpable you could cut it with a knife. China is advancing silently, methodically asserting control over critical resources as it expands its flight networks and solidifies lucrative contracts for strategic materials. This rise sparks a dire warning: Europe not only loses money but risks losing its standing in the global economy. With Russia navigating this turbulent sea of sanctions and closed airspaces, it surprisingly emerges as a pivotal player in global logistics and rare metal supply chains. This maneuvering alters perceptions even among those who previously supported the West's restrictions. In boardrooms across Europe, whispers of collaboration with Russia get louder, as businesses recognize that maintaining competitiveness might mean re-evaluating long-held beliefs. Suddenly, as if a light flickered on, the potential for dialogue re-emerges. Talks of easing restrictions begin to circulate. It's not just about planes but the transportation of essential resources. The West, teetering on the edge of economic despair, may have to find common ground, lest the gap between their ambitions and reality morph into a chasm of failure. The saga of airspace and lost resources delineates a crucial lesson: sanctions designed to pressure Russia may ironically become Europe's undoing. Can the West navigate this complex web of recovery? Or will it continue to spiral downwards, leaving it stranded in a precarious position on the map of global economic dynamics? As the dust settles, the horizon holds a promise of surprising developments. Will the tug-of-war between ideologies and economic survival lead to a new chapter in international cooperation, or will it unveil deeper fissures in the fabric of global relations? The world watches, breath held, as these pivotal decisions shape the future, urging us to ponder the unpredictable nature of power and resource control. The stakes have never been higher. In the landscape of global competition, the unfolding events around European sanctions and the aviation industry are poised to be decisive factors shaping who will rise to prominence and who will lag in the world's development in the coming decades. The recent sanctions intended to pressure Russia have backfired, hitting Europe where it hurts most, its economy. As airspace closures hamper European airlines, the loss of Ukrainian resources sharply shifts the balance of power. The competition for essential minerals like lithium and tantalum exacerbates the crisis. These resources, crucial for electronics and green technologies, are now more accessible to Russia, which strengthens its position in global trade. The irony is palpable. While Europe hoped to gain leverage over Russia, it instead positioned the Russian economy as a key player in the new geopolitical landscape. Meanwhile, China's quiet ascent continues unabated. By extending its airline routes and securing long-term contracts, Beijing is methodically increasing its influence. The palpable scent of fear is thick in the air for European businesses. How will they stay competitive? Dwindling access to resources and routes could force corporations to downsize or relocate to regions with resource access and efficient logistics. This tension between ideological stances and economic survival manifests as open dissent in boardrooms and offices across Europe. The moment ultimately calls into question, what happens when the pressure of ideology collides with the cold, hard reality of business? As Western powers grapple with these complexities, they'll be compelled to seek compromises, both in aviation and beyond. Without adjustment, the gap between ambitions and actual outcomes could spiral into catastrophe, reshaping the future terrain of global economics. Yet, amidst this chaos lies an emerging opportunity for Russia, as it stands ready to redefine itself in the arena of global logistics and rare minerals. This transition could redefine alliances, vaulting Moscow ahead of many Western nations now struggling under the weight of their own sanctions. How will this newfound resource control impact the overarching strategies of Western economies? In the near future, we may witness surprising new efforts for dialogue and reconciliation, with implications not only for air travel but potentially for trade in vital raw materials. Watch closely as the West navigates these waters, for without flexibility, their ambitions might just lead to their undoing. This entire saga surrounding airspace and resource management serves a glaring reminder: sanctions, meant as tools of pressure, may have become instruments of self-destruction for Europe. Life's grand narrative unfolds, revealing that power dynamics are ever shifting, and those who adapt may find themselves at the forefront of a new era, while others fade into the shadows of history's sidelines.